Moi, je Luca. Luca è il mio nome in italiano. J'adore les langues étrangères. Los idiomas han cambiado mi vida. Ich glaube, es ist wunderbar zu reisen. Lubię po prostu mówić po polsku. Ik spreek ook een beetje Nederlands. Eu älskar den skandinaviska kulturen. Eu тоже говорю по-русски. Falo também português, mas é português de Portugal. Não, imádom beszélni, magyarul beszélni.
Welcome back to Evolve. Today we have the privilege of speaking to Luca, who is a YouTuber, entrepreneur, language enthusiast, and founder of the Smart Language Learning Academy. Today we're going to be hearing Luca's tips from beginner to native language fluency. So Luca, thank you so much for your time today. Welcome to Evolve.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I think this is going to be interesting.
For sure. I mean, we've been following your content and it's actually quite hard to keep track of how many languages you actually speak. I mean, you've been in the language space for a very long time. So we're excited. But before we do get into the real nitty gritty, we've got to know, how many languages do you actually speak?
Well, it's an interesting question that I get asked all the time, and it all depends on the definition of the word to speak. I always say that I've been learning 15 languages and that my own definition of fluency, we can talk about that later, I speak 10 of them fluently.
10 of them fluently. Can we hear which ones those are?
So my native language is Italiano, la mia bella lingua madre, my native language. Then I speak un peu de français, a little bit of French. I've been speaking it for more than 30 years. I speak English. I've been speaking it for 34 or 35 years. So I'm that old. Yes, I started since I was 10, and then I speak a German. I have to remember the exact chronological order in which I've learned them. Then Dutch, then Swedish, Russian, Polish, Portuguese, Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, Greek, Hungarian, Danish, and I'm currently learning Turkish, and I also learn Serbian. I think that's 15. When I say 15, I also consider my own native language Italian, which is a language in and of itself, and sometimes I forget. I get rusty in that language as well.
Oh, è una lingua bellissima italiano, no?
Assolutamente sì.
Yeah. But wow, I mean, just processing all of that information is incredible. I know you've got a huge passion for this. So someone clicking on this video is going to see you in this position. But how would the average Joe on the street clicking on this, what advice would you give to them from going and starting off as a beginner in a new language to really hitting that native fluency?
Okay, so this is a very interesting question. I don't know how much time we have, but
we've got enough.
We got enough time. Okay, let's start from the very beginning. The first piece of advice I would give is that you have to know why you want to learn that language. So do not learn a language just for the sake of it, right? Maybe you heard that learning Mandarin Chinese is a pretty cool thing, or you heard your neighbor who boasts about him speaking German. I think you always have to know exactly the reason why, and the reason or the motive or the reasons and the motives, and they have to be, I call them profound. They have to be yours, because if external, then it's not going to last that much. That's the first thing. You have to know exactly why you're learning a language. Maybe you're learning it because you want to move to a given country. Maybe you want to learn it because it's really important because you got yourself a girlfriend or a boyfriend who speaks that language and you want to talk to them as well as their family and friends. Maybe you want to watch a cinema in that language or literature, enjoy the literature in that language. Whatever the reason or the reasons are, you have to know exactly why, because if you don't know your why, if your why is not intrinsic, if your reasons are not intrinsic, it's not going to last too long, because motivation is something that happens like, oh, I'm motivated to learn. Yes, okay, fine. In the short term. But in the long term, that's a different matter, which brings us to big piece of advice number 2, if you want to call it that, and that is language learning takes time. When you hear polyglots or so-called polyglots or even normal people claim that you can learn a language in 2 days or in 2 months, true story, by the way, because there's a lot of people who claim that, oh, I've learned this language in 3 months, you have to realize that that is not a realistic thing. It's not a realistic perspective, because it takes a long, long time to learn a foreign language. And by learning, I mean that you speak it fluently. Now, it all depends on what you mean by speaking a language fluently. But to me, the definition of speaking a language fluently means that you can function in a society, you can understand most of what people say, and that you can get your point across relatively confidently, which does not mean, by the way, that you speak perfectly, that you do not make mistakes, or that sometimes you're not scared. So, but that definition, it takes at the very least, a couple of years of intense study, even with languages that are relatively close to yours or some other languages you have under your belt. It takes at least 2 years to reach that level. And then beyond, if you want to reach the upper echelons of language learning, C1, C2, for those who don't know, C1, C2, I tend to use this CEFR, which is Central European Framework for Languages. You can easily find it on the internet, and it takes time. So again, you have to know exactly why, because if you don't know your why, your motivation is going to wane, taper off sooner or later. And then you have to know that you are in it for a long ride. And that long ride is full of hurdles, but also it's really rewarding and it's really exciting. So you have to be aware of that. And then the third piece of advice I would say is that you have to align 3 very important factors. There's a famous psychologist. Her name is Susan Kruger, who talked about the fact that in order to acquire any skill efficiently, you have to have 3 factors aligned. The first one is your mindset, that is the way you think about something. The second one is your skill set, or the strategies that you implement in order to learn anything, to acquire any skill. And the third one is organization. You got to get organized. If these 3 things are not aligned, so if you have a great mindset, but you're not very well organized, or you don't have very efficient strategies, then it ain't going to cut it, as they say. It's not going to happen. So it's important to have a positive mindset. And by positive mindset, I mean, okay, I can learn a language. People who've never learned a language, for example, they highly doubt that they can do it. I still remember back in the day when I was trying to ride a bike. I was trying to learn to ride a bike, and I was 10. No, I was not 10. I was 7, I think. And I spent the whole day trying to ride a bike. And at the end, I ended up in tears because I was convinced I would never, ever ride a bike. This is how a lot of learners out there feel. Like they've tried their hand before at any language, at a language, and they think that they're not able to learn because they've tried, strategies that do not work. It's not their fault. But if you've never learned a language to fluency, you have the doubt creeping in that maybe, just maybe you're not cut out for learning languages, which is absolutely not true, because we're all wired to learn foreign languages. So it's really important to align these 3 things. Mindset, you have to develop a positive mindset. You have to learn how to learn. So learning how to learn is really important, especially nowadays that we have so many tools and so many materials, but we don't know how to use them. We get overwhelmed by all this, like, oh, I have this and that and the platform and the app. And then we end up, jack of all trades, master of none. And then you have to get organized. Getting organized means getting focused, removing friction of actually sitting down and learning, using your time correctly, and all these things that really make a difference. Just let's start with these 3 pieces of advice that we can get deeper into the nitty-gritty details of language learning, language acquisition.
For sure, yeah. Even before we go deeper, let's try and put me in the position of like rewind to before I studied languages. Let's say I'm 18 years old. I've got a dream that I want to work at the UN headquarters in Geneva. So I got to nail French, right? I want to be able to work in both languages. That's my why. Like I've got a clear career goal, but then in terms of organizing and building those, like I understand now I need the mindset, but what of those actual strategies are going to be made up in my routine? Am I going to be reading French newspapers, and am I going to be getting flashcards or Anki or all these things people are talking about? What are the actual, like I've got the mindset now, but I need the building blocks. What are those blocks basically?
Of course.
For you?
This is a very important question. Let me preface this by saying that even before we talk about strategies, we talk about methods. We should talk about principles, meaning that normally beginners, what they do is they find solace and confidence in methods, because a method gives you, this is a step-by-step thing. But if this were true, everybody would, okay, let me take a look at, this is a step-by-step thing. I try it and I succeed. Actually, I think expert learners rely on principles. They understand the principles, and they can bend these principles so that they can find their own strategies, the strategies that work according to them. What do I mean by all that? Okay. So just to give an example, I think that the most important thing, the most important concept is flexibility. Flexibility means that basically you have to find, even if it sounds bad, but you have to find what works for you. And because, if there were this one-size-fits-all thing, everybody would follow it, and we would not be talking about language learning anymore. So there are some very important principles. The first one is flexibility. You have to be flexible enough so that you can experiment things. I really liked, for example, a book that I read recently. Her name, she's a psychologist. I think she's actually a psychiatrist or neuroscientist. Anne-Laure Lecunf. She wrote a book which is called Tiny Experiments. It is all about experimenting. And it's all about trying things instead of thinking about linear goals. Okay, I got a goal, then I got the next goal, then I got the next goal. Think in terms of experiments. So your life is a giant, experiment playground, and you experiment things. So let's get started, right? This guy comes to me. He's desperate to learn French. The first thing I would tell him is that get stuff. You have to think about the what, the when, and the how. The what is, what do I use when I start learning a language? Now, this might sound a little bit counterintuitive, especially in this highly technological world, but I would say go paper. So paper here, and exactly. And buy something that you can actually use, you can leaf through. Of course, you need audio, which is very important, but you have something tangible that you can touch, that you can leaf through, you can see, etc. You can read. And I would go for language learning materials for beginners that contain simple dialogues and very, very simple grammar explanations that help you understand the dialogue even better. An example of that is Assimil. A lot of Europeans know this is because this is a French company, but Assimil stands for assimilate. So the concept is you don't learn a language, you assimilate it, which is a concept I like. So you start with something simple, which is a book, a booklet, a book that contains, for example, 100 very short dialogues in both your target language and your native language, has some grammar explanations, because you do need some grammar explanations at the very beginning, because the language is a very obscure object, a foreign language you just started. And you start with that and you build a foundation. This is the what. The how is that if you read and listen, that is fine, but you have to find engaging ways and things like actions, steps that are engaging for you so that you can absorb the content instead of just reading it. At school, we got used to thinking that, a manual is just something you read, but this is the kind of tool you use in order to build skills. So just to give you an example of what you can do, you have a text, right? In English, let's say that we're talking still about Joe, the average Joe, or Mark. Let's call him Mark, this American guy, 18-year-old who wants to learn French. So what you do is you have the text in French, which is a target language, and you have the text in English. So you have the translation he can actually understand. So what he can do at the beginning, he can listen and read directly in French so that he can create a sound map of the language. Okay, this language sounds like this, and it's written like this, especially in French. French and English have horrific spelling. So if you read and listen, you can actually see what you're hearing.
Just a quick message before we get back to the video. Today's sponsor is FluentU. FluentU makes language learning natural, using real videos and smart tools to get you speaking as quickly as possible. Thanks to FluentU's Chrome extension, you can learn from any Netflix or YouTube video with subtitles and even import your own YouTube videos as well. In addition to that, you can explore their curated library of both beginner and intermediate content. Tap on any word to instantly see its meaning, images, and examples of real-life context where that word's used, in addition to other videos where the same word's used. Their integrated review system takes you step by step, starting with words, then building to phrases, and finally full sentences, so you can put all the components of the language and actually start speaking. So ready to finally start speaking a new language? FluentU is offering a 40% discount for those who click the link in the description box below. It's available on the web, iOS, and on Android. So what are you waiting for? Click the link on the description box below. Stop memorizing and start speaking. Thanks for watching, and let's get back to the video.
Then you can compare the two texts. You have the text in French, text in English, line by line. You can compare, right? And when you don't understand something, you have notes that fill in the gaps. So just by comparing, you can understand a lot. Some people would say that, oh, you're using translation. This is an old translation grammar method. But actually, it depends on how you use translation. We will translate anyway, because our brain always learns by connecting the familiar or the unfamiliar with the familiar. So why not leverage our skills? We already have the skill as adults. You use the English in order to understand the French. So, and then you listen and read again. So step number one, you can listen and read in French and you focus just on creating a sound map of the language. This language is written this way, spoken this way. Then you compare the two languages. Oh, now I understand. And you can even mark words. That's the beauty of having a piece of paper, something tangible that you can touch. You can use a pencil. This stimulates enormously your motor memory. Remember, anything that is filled on the screen gets cut, like your brain discards 50, 75% of it. So paper is really important. Then you can listen to it again while reading it in French, but this time you have understood it, right? So it's a step-by-step process where the language gets revealed to you, it's like layers. And then you can just listen to it, for example. And if someone says, okay, but can you change the order? Of course you can change the order. You could just listen to it at the beginning if you want, 2, 3, 4 times. Then you can listen and read, or maybe you can understand it. The order doesn't matter as long as you do these steps. Of course, there's more to it than meets the eye. I have, for example, use a bidirectional translation. So it's a technique that involves all that, encompasses all these steps, but even more actively. Then I translate it into my own native language, and then I wait a few days to retranslate it back in writing, so that basically I'm developing all these sub-skills: listening, and reading, just reading, translating, thinking in the language, building sentences, spelling, and whatnot. But the bottom line, going back to what I was saying before, this is one method that I've developed, but the principle is engage with the content in a proactive way that you like, and you experiment. So you have to be flexible enough to think, okay, this Luca guy says I can do these steps. What about if I do my own steps? What about if I cut some steps? What about if I reorder them? What about if I introduce more? That is the power of experimenting. Flexibility, experimentation, and most of all, you have to do what you like doing. If you do that, then the language learning, every language learning session every day becomes its own reward, and you're bound to do this again. You're not relying on motivation, which is a feeble thing, but you're relying on reward, right? And habit, and language learning becomes systematic. So that is what I would tell, what was his name? Mark, right? Mark? And the third thing I would tell him is get organized. Every day, identify the right time, like for you. When are you French? For me, it's the morning. I'm a very, very morning person. And then, like I did today, for example, sit down every time. It's always the same thing. You have a habit. You have what is called habit anchoring. Oh, maybe I've just finished breakfast. After breakfast or after taking a shower, after workout, you sit down for 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And that is the time session that you're going to dedicate to that one language for 30 minutes, 45. Most important thing is to start every single day, and then you get going by doing what you like for a few months. You build a foundation. Once you've built this foundation, then you move on to the next phase, which is the intermediate phase. We can talk about this, but this is the foundation. 3 to 6 months of very intensive training, 30 minutes to 60 minutes. Use a concrete physical booklet for beginners that contain mostly dialogues in real language. You have to have audio and possibly a translation, vocabulary session, and grammar, very lean grammar notes that allow you to understand the text even better. And that, let's say, compensate and improves just merely comparing the two languages. Sometimes it's not enough because languages are very different. English and French, it's okay. English and Italian, it's okay. English and Turkish, you need some help in order to dissect the text.
Well, thanks so much for breaking that down. And I think that I really like the combination of, from the start already, I'm reading, but I'm also listening. So I was going to ask, you were mentioning like textbooks, but to actually fully understand textbooks with like an audio feature as well, right? So that you could listen to it. Like, where would people get the audio from? Like, what kind of references would you suggest?
This is a very important question. And I got actually not astounded, but quite surprised when I made a specific video, which is called Listen and Read Which One Comes First, because audio is absolutely essential. You acquire a language through audio. You don't acquire a language just by reading. This reminds me of a lady who organized a conference in Moscow, and she spoke English fluently, but with a very thick accent, and asked her, what do you like? Actually, she told me, I didn't need to ask. And she complained about the fact that, I got this very thick Russian accent because I've never listened to the language. I was just reading it. So audio is really important. You can easily find it when you buy the package. If you buy Asimil, if you buy Pod 101, which is another program, and there's hundreds depending on the language, you always have to get audio. Audio is the most important thing. Do not buy a booklet or a book, language learning material without audio. Audio is the most important thing ever. You can always create text yourself. You can even grasp random audio and create it yourself. But I recommend, the reason why I recommend these programs is because they're designed for beginners. So they give you everything in one package that you need in order to understand the language. Remember that we acquire language through content that we can understand. We can make it comprehensible nowadays. We can take any YouTube video and we can create our own transcript or subtitles, etc. with these amazing tools we have. But people are lazy. If you have to download something audio, then you have to create the transcript, blah, blah, blah. It gets difficult and friction gets in the way. If you get this book like Asimil or even Pod 101, you can download the PDFs, then make sure you always get the audio. But they normally come with a package. Actually, with Asimil on Amazon, you can buy it without the audio. It's a big mistake. So audio and PDF or audio and the physical book, that's a must because listening and reading is the most important thing you can do at the very beginning. Think about it for a second, Hakeem. Your native language is English, I guess, right?
Yep.
Do you spend time listening and reading in English at the same time? No, it's rare.
No,
right?
not at all. Yeah.
Right. So when you reach a high level, let's say that when you start learning a language, if you don't read and listen, well, then either you develop bad pronunciation if you just read, or if you don't listen at all, you will not understand what people say, right? Or if you listen to something, but it's all a mumble jumble of things because you can't see it. Words are all attached together. So reading and listening gives you the advantage of you actually see, you get focused because you listen and read at the same time. And I've always wondered why a lot of people say, no, you should listen first because otherwise you're cheating. If you're reading, you're cheating. And we still get back to this school mindset where you're cheating. Language learning is not a performance. It's not a competition. It's a personal road for your own. It's a personal rewarding, road. And the best way to go about it is to try to find yourself in a situation where you find yourself at ease and you learn. So you still have to struggle a little bit, but not struggle too much. So why do you have to get yourself into the trap and the problem of having to try to understand something, as a beginner? When you have a text, you can just read and listen. The main goal is to comprehend, understand things, grasp things as soon as possible so you can build a foundation in the language as soon as possible, 3 to 6 months.
Excellent. Yeah. So from my personal experience of working with a lot of students from, for example, Asia, where I would say that from the start, they peak in the writing and the reading and the grammar, but they don't necessarily make that effort to listen and then build the, as you said, awareness of the accent and the pronunciation. And it's such a missed opportunity. So what you've said there hits home, where I've just met people who are incredible linguists in one aspect, where they've dedicated 30 years of their life and they're masters. They might have PhDs, whatever, geniuses in their own right. But then when they open their mouth, like you said with that example in Moscow, you can't unhear it. You know that person is perhaps here, but when they speak, you may assume, oh, they're actually not that good, even though technically they are, just because they haven't dedicated that. And it's such a good point from anyone starting. I really, really like that. And the routine aspect as well. I always find that the hardest part is starting, but once the snowball is going down and you've got the avalanche, you're not necessarily thinking, like I've seen in your videos, what is it? When you cook or in the kitchen, it's Polish or whatever language it is. And then that, like, in that moment, after you've been doing that for a few months, you're probably not even consciously thinking I'm working now. It's just a routine, right?
Yeah, the thing is that we're complicating things. We complicate language learning. I was reading just today. I started reading a very interesting book, which is, I don't remember the exact title. I think it's How to Learn a Foreign Language by Paul Pimsleur. Pimsleur has this very famous program where you have to listen, like this audio only thing. And now I don't remember the exact thing he said. Now I have the Kindle somewhere, but he basically was talking about this. Like, people make it complicated, and they kind of see a language like, I'm learning specifically grammar. I'm doing like grammar drills and pronunciation, etc. And then that creates a lot of confusion in your brain. Well, you have to learn a language in a very organic way. What's the simplest way to go about it? Listen and read. Watch and read the subtitles, for example, because in that way, if you, let's say, process the information through multiple steps, let's say that you're watching a video. The first time you watch it with let's say with French subtitles, to go back to the example of Mark, then you just download the script and you read the transcript or the transcript of the subtitles. Then you watch it again. So You're just analyzing, you're going through this process. Then organically, the mind is going to put together pronunciation, grammar, syntax, vocabulary, etc., etc. Well, if we spend time just on making vocabulary lists or doing flashcards or just trying to do shadowing, this is all good, all fine and good, but it misses the point that we're breaking down something complex. It's a skill that we acquire in a natural way. Think about how kids learn their own native language. They don't do any grammar drills. Can you imagine 3-year-old at a playground? Hey, let's do some shadowing. Let's do some grammar drills. They just play and use the language for communication. Of course, that is a little bit different in the sense that language acquisition to me happens in exactly the same way for adults and children, but the circumstances, the brain plasticity, it's different. So there's much to say about that. I got a YouTube video about that difference between kids and adults. But the bottom line is, what I wanted to say is that by dissecting a text that is incomprehensible at the beginning, you go through multiple steps in an organic way, steps that you like the order, you like the steps, you tried it, you experimented. Then at the end of the day, you're going through something that you like, that was incomprehensible at the beginning and is comprehensible at the end. The main goal is to make the text comprehensible. Whatever happens between the incomprehensible A and the comprehensible B is what we call language acquisition. Whatever we try to learn or force learning, like learning grammar or studying grammar rules, it's not going to work because the way our brain is structured is indeed wired for learning languages, but if we feed it the right food, so to speak, it's not going to digest it well. I always use this digestion thing, that learning, sitting down, listening, reading is the setting up the table and eating. The digestion process is not up to us anymore. So our main goal is to set up a table and get great food. The rest of digestion, if the food is great, the cutlery is great, etc., the digestion is going to be a great digestion. If it's not, if the food is poor, the digestion is going to be poor as well. So keep that in mind because it's really important. Acquiring a language and learning a language, they're both parts. One is subconscious, the other one is conscious. The conscious part has to be leveraged so that it facilitates the acquisition. This is called a weak interface hypothesis in linguistics. And but the bottom line, just in very simple terms, do organic things like dissecting text and analyzing text you like. Find them from the very beginning, then move on to podcasts and videos. We can talk about that later in the intermediate phase. And then the language will flourish with you, in you and with you.
I love it. I mean, the thing is as well, I love that example about food. And I know Italians are extremely passionate about food, so it makes perfect sense there.
La pasta,
Exactamente.
pizza, tutto il resto.
Buonissimo. But no, I mean, I think you're probably going to get into this later, but even just in my experiences, the moment I started watching French shows and movies with the French subtitles, all of those connections are going on subconsciously. Oh, he said this, that's a silent letter. So many things that you probably miss usually suddenly make perfect sense. So that's probably preempting what you're going to talk about more in the intermediate phase. But just on that point of digestion, that's out of our hands then, right? You're saying if you just keep up that routine, could you just comment a little bit more? What exactly do you mean? I'm doing this. The digestion, what exactly does that refer to?
So the digestion is the subconscious acquisition of language. In other words, just to give an example, let's suppose that that the Mark, our beloved hero Mark, started his journey on January 1st, 2026. And after 3 months, he's been doing Asimil, right? He's been following the routine and he's almost finished Asimil. Then he moves on to podcasts and videos and he starts watching those or consuming those, both listening to podcasts and alternating with videos, and he does it for a year. Now, what normally happens is that the learning part is sitting down and making sure that you learn every day for 30 minutes or 60 minutes. Then let's say, for example, that on top of that, he also starts listening in the background while he's running some errands, washing the dishes, walking the dog and whatnot. What happens is that the brain, let's say the subconscious part of the brain starts absorbing the language. There are two main, let's say, models. We use this model, like generally in neuroscience, you use the declarative memory and procedural memory. Just to simplify, people can look it up if they want when they're looking for this. But the reason why language learning does not happen in school or is not efficient, or let me put it in a different way, the reason why most people get out of school after 5 years of college, school, language school, whatever you want to call it, and they can't string a sentence together is because we're leveraging in school, we're mostly doing things backwards. The entire education system has it backwards. Not everybody, not in every country. Some got it right, but mostly got it wrong. What I mean by that is that the brain is structured in a certain way. So let's go back to the declarative memory and procedural memory. Think about your own native language. You don't think you don't think about grammar rules when you speak your own native language. One word leads to the other. It's automatic, right? Think about when you walk. When you walk, you don't think about like, oh, how do I put the foot? What is the physics around it? When you ride a bike, when you drive a car, that is because we call it automaticity, or the process has become automatic, and it's handled by the procedural part of the brain. So there's a part of the brain that handles procedures, like how you use your hands, how you cook. These are skills, right? And the main language, or our own native language, is handled by that. So we first acquired it when we were kids subconsciously, and then we learned about it at school. So you go to school as a native English speaker, and then they talk about grammar a little bit. Oh, this is an adjective. This is a verb. This is knowledge about the language, right? So skill is procedural. Knowledge is declarative. It's something that you can declare. For example, if I asked you, Hakeem, how do you say dog in Italian, right? You know that. You can say, oh, okay, it's cane. You remember you can fetch it. When were you born? That is a piece of information you can fetch it. Procedural is an entire procedure you can't explain. You just do it, right? So bear with me for a second. What normally happens at school is that we try to teach language by learning about grammar, like, for example, grammar rules. And then teachers, or let's say the system demands that the students apply the rule on the fly. When you speak of a foreign language, if you are still it's impossible to think about a grammar rule and apply it at the same time. Because these two parts conflict, the procedural part and the declarative part. So the bottom line is that we have to leverage more the procedural part. And the procedural part is all about, if you listen, if you watch a show for hours, if you look at the subtitles, and naturally what happens is that the procedural memory is going to say, hey, wait a second. Oh, this word, this structure. Children learn by constantly listening to entire sentences uttered around them. So the brain figures out the patterns and it coalesces. This information really gets digested and gets absorbed by the language, but it takes time. Acquisition is subconscious and slow. Learning is fast and superficial. That is why setting up the table can be fast. You can speed it up, but you can't speed out acquisition. That is why I always say, okay, well, there's people say, I learned this language in 3 months. It means they've learned. They can fake the knowledge, they can cut the video, or they can pretend that they speak, but then probably they don't understand it, because listening comprehension takes years to acquire. So language, literally in language schools and in institutions, they still got it wrong. Language learning is simple at its core, but not easy to learn because of all this self-sabotage and this friction that the school system and the entire system has, the way it functions. That's the reason why I always say, people react and go like, oh, you must be a genius to speak 15 languages. I say, no, I'm not a genius. I'm a very normal person. I think I have a good memory, but I'm not a savant, where a person who learns things on the fly. It still takes me time to process information, but I know how to use my brain, to leverage my brain to learn. And I do it every day, and I'm very passionate about it. I have my motives, so to speak. I have very intrinsic reasons, and voila, this is how it happens. But I'm by no means a genius or anything. I might have a knack for languages, maybe also for pronunciation. I really like, imitating people and mimicking and producing sounds, but that is a different matter. As far as language learning, we are all wired to learn any language in the world, provided that we learn how to do it, we're passionate, and once again, we get organized to make it happen.
Awesome. I mean, especially it goes back to that metaphor about eating. I mean, if you try and eat too much in one go, you're probably not going to digest. You might have the verbal vomit, so to say. So I think it really does come back to that patience, like you said. And if you've got those building blocks, like you said, you've studied a bit of the grammar, every time then in the subconscious, like learning and listening, sometimes it will be conscious, where you listen to something and say, I learned that this is this tense, and I just recognize that the speaker used the passé composé or the conditional tense in Italian or whatever. But a lot of it will be going on subconsciously, as you said, right? But the more you've got of that, the more of those little connections are going to happen in a gradual way, like you said. And I think it's so important that we both reinforced that Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So
exactly right. It's called again, weak interface hypothesis. Is 10% is leveraging your knowledge, 90% is subconscious. So the fact that we can read text, that we can leverage grammar notes in our own native language, it facilitates the acquisition. But in reality, most of what happens when we speak a foreign language fluently is subconscious. It takes time, it's slow, and it's literally very similar to the digestion, that happens once you eat,
For sure. And I mean, in my personal experiences of learning different languages, I was so frustrated when I lived in Thailand, and I would try and imitate the tones and just get people looking at me like, sorry, I can't understand this foreigner. And then one day, after so much practice, you do wake up and it seems like it was instant, but it wasn't. It was grueling to keep going up. Yeah, I can also just, I guess, foreshadowing that pronunciation is a key area. So I definitely want to pick your brains on that later. But let's go back to Mark in the journey now. What's the next step for him of now building up to the next part of the ladder?
I like it. It's like phase by phase, right? Well, again, let's go back to what I was saying before. It's a very important point. Is language learning happens in phases. So it's really important to stress the fact that any acquisition, like when it comes to acquisition of any skill, you function and you operate in phases. Phase number 1 is the beginner phase, where the most important goal is to get a foundation and understand how the language works. So going back to Mark, he's learning a language. He's been learning French for, let's say, 3 to 4 months. He has used Assimil, right? And now he has a basic understanding of how the language works. Is he able to speak? No, and that's totally fine. He understands how the language works at its foundation. The next move, what I would recommend, but again, everybody is different, is to move on to either creating or finding podcasts and videos that are great for his level. And here there's another very important principle, which is called the Goldilocks zone. In the English-speaking world, Goldilocks is a very famous tale, whether the soup was too cold or too hot. And in cognitive development, they call it the zone of proximal development. It's a very fancy word. In other words, or in a few words, it means that you find yourself in a learning zone where things are neither too difficult nor too easy. And here's where it gets tricky, because once you finished Assimil, you've gotten out of the comfort zone. Okay, I've learned. Okay, this was easy. Luca told me, get this language learning book for material. What do you do next, right? There's so much stuff out there. So my suggestion would be to leverage the Goldilocks zone and to find language learning material that is right a little bit above your current level. It could be, for example, you can type on Google or you can type on ChatGPT, where can I find language learning material between A1, A2? Let's say for A2 learners. Because Assimil, whether it's 1 book or 2 books, depending on the language, prepares you for this, but it's just a foundation. You're just getting started. You're ready to get into the real boot camp, so to speak. And depending on the language, nowadays we're lucky enough that there's hundreds and hundreds of possibilities. Starting, like, for example, Pod 101, to give you a concrete example. I finished Assimil Greek. I did it for 3 to 4 months, maybe a little bit more. And then I moved on to Pod 101. That was perfect at my level. But I could have, for example, started using, they didn't exist at the time, but now they do exist, podcasts for beginners, so A2 level. That would have been perfect for me. Easy Greek. The Easy Greek channel has it. I think Easy Greek, Easy Spanish, Easy everything. They have these podcasts that are amazing because they're natural, but they're also built for learners. So they kind of strike the perfect balance between the two. And the reason why I'm advocating for podcasts is because it's a natural conversation. It's natural language. You're like witnessing a conversation between 2 individuals, and it can be simplified. The language can be simplified. So for A2 learners, and the amazing part of this nowadays with AI, you can create your own podcasts. I'm heavily relying on NotebookLM. I made a video about that also on my YouTube channel. And basically, I am not even using, I bought this package, subscription for Easy Turkish, because it's great, but I moved on to these podcasts that I'm creating. So I fetch my own YouTube videos about stuff I like. For example, let's say children versus adults. And I feed it into NotebookLM, which is free, by the way. And it creates a 7-minute podcast with perfect audio between two individuals about my video, talking about, hey, this Luca Lampariello guy made a great video about learning, children versus, and it's stuff I love. So I can't get enough of that. I don't know where they are right now. Got a lot of stuff here, but it's just great because I have my own library of the Fermi paradox, cosmology, language learning, neuroscience. So I'm having the time of my life. Nowadays, learners can do that. Now, these podcasts might be a little bit like, in my case, they're slightly higher than my level, but that is the good stuff because we don't learn through memorization. We learn through struggle. That is the most important. When I read that in a book I read by Dan Coe, I thought, bingo, we don't learn through memorization, learn through struggle, right? So if you struggle a little bit, you don't struggle too much, but a little bit, and the content is slightly higher, you love it. You have the tools to understand it because I get the audio, I download it, I create my own transcript, and I create a translation in Italian or in English. Bingo. Then you're all set for the next 6 months. And as a low intermediate learner, A2 in Turkish, this is exactly what I do and exactly what I recommend. Spend 6 months using either podcasts or videos that are highly interesting for you. You can create your own podcasts right now. And the second thing is that you can understand comprehensible through the tools. You can nowadays create a translation, and there's many other amazing tools. For example, ChatGPT, you can ask, I don't understand this passage. Explain the grammar. And third is they have to be rich. Rich means they have to have 20% or 30% of the language has to be unknown to you, so you keep learning. These three things, then you're bound to acquire that language because you do it every day for an hour. Imagine that. Sit down for 1 hour. This is exactly what I did today. I always do it at the coffee shop I go to, 9:00. Sit down for an hour. Unfortunately, I don't have it here. I don't know where it is. I have a transcript written in front of me. I have this pencil. I have the Google Translate or DeepL. So I have a translation in Italian. I listen to it. I understand. I first listen to it in Italian while I read it in Turkish so that I can quickly understand. And I do that with Google Translate. You have the text, you copy it. Google Translate will read it for you in your own native language. So I don't even have to look at the screen. I jot down all the words that I don't know while I'm listening twice because it reads it slow. You can just tell it, I'll tell it. If you click twice, it will read it slowly. And then I read it multiple times while I listen to it in Greek, in Turkish. I have the time of my life. It's really simple. It's really effective. I'm reading, going through stuff I literally love. I can't get enough of that. And I'm learning a ton. So I'm absorbing the language. Am I fluent in Turkish? No, I still don't speak it. I don't mind going through this for a year or even 2 years because I'm having the time of my life. So that's what I would recommend. At the intermediate phase, don't use books. Don't use graded readers. Graded readers are these books that are kind of simplified. Just get into podcasts and videos with real language, possibly monologues or dialogues between two people that are built either for learners or that you can create yourself, slightly higher than your level. Get a transcript, print it, use a piece of paper, and then use a piece of paper and a pencil. Mark words down because this is really important for your motor memory. It develops your motor memory. And on top of that, please only find the use stuff you like, and that is a big game changer. And I normally do it for a year and a half or 2 years. Until then, I move on to the next step, which is the advanced stage. There's also speaking, but we can talk about this in a bit.
Yeah, I've got a couple of follow-up points because based on what you said there, like you've said quite a few times so far, get things that you like, that you're interested in. I mean, it's so broad, right? But I'm wondering, just in your in your experiences, from your perspective, what is something you like? Can we have an example of what are these created AI podcasts or ones that you're accessing in Turkish? What is Luca? What makes you, I guess, feel good to read and learn at the same time?
I can also, after this interview, I can send you, or maybe in the next days, I can send you pictures of what I'm doing so that you can actually see what happens.
That'd be great.
So you can put it on the screen. But the bottom line is that I think about what I'm really interested in. This is really, it's become a very simple process. I call a YouTube sanity sheet. I call that a YouTube sanity sheet because we have this FOMO thing that, this video is interesting. Then you put it there, it's on your tab and you don't open it. And then you have 3,000 tabs. So I thought, okay, every time that I stumble upon something interesting, I put it in this worksheet. Normally, I'm really interested in cosmology, neuroscience, history, geopolitics, of course, language, ça va sans dire, language learning and language acquisition, psychology. These are cinema. So these are the 7-8 things I'm really interested in. Actually, I love everything, but let's say eight top fields that I'm really interested in: science, mathematics, astrophysics. I'm really passionate about that. I'm an engineer, electronic engineer, but I really wanted to do physics, astrophysics. Didn't happen. That's not the other world. And I put them into, every time I watch, I have an interesting YouTube video. I stumble upon an interesting YouTube video. I put it there, and every day I feed NotebookLM in Turkish or other languages, and then I create my own podcast. Now, here's an interesting thing. We can talk about this later, but I also found a very interesting way to repeat and get exposed to vocabulary through multiple angles. I don't know what is happening with the balloons. But
congratulations. I don't know what's going on. But
this is what happens when you do this. It's just congratulations. It's like, good on you. Just to go back to what I was saying before, I'm very systematic. Every day I create 3 podcasts in Turkish or in Hungarian, for example. And now I'm doing it for Serbian as well because this NotebookLM is so cool. And I go to my YouTube sanity sheet and I decide, okay, well, what is it that I found interesting? It's, again, I have my own YouTube channels that I really like about language learning. Steve Kaufman is an example of that, using his videos. Cosmology, Amedeo Balbi, he's a famous astrophysicist, Italian astrophysicist, who talks about, I really like his videos. So I'm feeding the machine or the AI, all these things, creating my own library. And it's a game changer for me because one of the things that people complain about, how do I find language learning material that I like, that is enjoyable, and that is comprehensible, that is at my level? This is the most difficult thing to find. Nowadays, if you reach that A2 level, you can start building your own language learning material. And on top of that, if you have a little bit, again, going back to the experimental mind, you just write on ChatGPT, hey, I'm really interested in, I might have an A2 level in French. This is what I can do. You describe your abilities. Mm-hmm. Please find language learning material for me that is great for my level. So if you learn how to experiment and think outside of the box, because sometimes people ask me, where can I find this? Nowadays, you can easily ask ChatGPT. It will find it for you. You try it. Do you like it? Great. You don't like it? Discard it. Find something until, search for something until you find the one thing that is good for you. Experiment is never a fixed thing. Oh, the guy told me I have to use this method and this language learning material. You have to question everything, even including the things I'm saying. Question everything and follow your trust your mind, trust your instinct.
You basically answered the question I wanted to ask you, the follow-up, which was, let's say, okay, I am interested in neuroscience and astrophysics. For an A2 learner, it seems a little bit daunting, like to dive in. But then the remedy for that seems that AI can basically craft something that is still within your area of interest, but not too challenging. It's still within that 20 to 30% range, right?
That's exactly correct. That's exactly right. But not only. There are even language creators that have content that is at a lower level, talking about these complex things. You can break down anything. Anything complex can be broken down, and it can be handled in a simple way, in simple language. So nowadays we have both human beings, strange, but we do still have human beings.
Just a few
left that create great content at your level, especially A2, between A2 and B1, which is I call it the gray zone, is a critical phase, but also you can create your own stuff with a little bit of experimentation on ChatGPT. You can ask to create your own podcasts, and you can ask a native friend of who speaks that language to read it, to create the audio, or even AI to read the audio for you. So if you have initiative, you can really create your own native, highly personalized content at your level, which is a big revolution that most people are not even aware of as of now, but they will.
Awesome. I mean, the thing is, I started studying languages at school, so I was about 11. And the idea, even for me now, to just hear this, it's so I mean, it's new. It's new to me even to consider doing this, but why not? It makes perfect sense of being able to hit that sweet spot, like you said. Um, but okay, before we go on to the more advanced side, one thing we haven't actually mentioned yet is, I mean, I guess this is mostly self-study, right? Everything you've mentioned, I could kind of do in my own house. But where does the interaction with other people come, or speaking? Because so far it's been a lot about like understanding, listening. Like you said with that Turkish, it will take you, you're going to dedicate a year and a year or half, what was it, up to a year or a year and a half to do that.
Mhm.
Are you going to be speaking along the way? Are you going to be, or is this just like I need to prepare for battle in my room first before going out to the war zone of actually speaking?
So this is a very interesting question. It's a very important one of that. Now, let me tell you that when it comes to me, I'm talking about, let's talk about principles, but also let's talk about personal stuff. Like, I like doing this stuff. I like learning. Let's say sitting down and learning by myself for up to 2 years. Most people will not do that unless they can use the language somehow in a meaningful way. Otherwise, they're going to get bored, or they're going to get unmotivated and say, "Well, what is it for?" This most people. Not necessarily everybody, but most people want to speak that language and want to communicate. That's for the sake of communication. So speaking with someone is indeed important, because if you don't do it within the 2 year span, even after a year, even after 3 months, people are going to go like, okay, well, what is this for? So to name another guy you probably know, Richard Simcott, who's a very famous polyglot, he speaks a bunch of languages. He is on the opposite side, like of the spectrum, meaning that he just likes speaking, using the language from the get-go. I saw this firsthand when we were in Poland. He had been learning the language for a few weeks. Truth be told, he already knew a lot of Slavic languages, which helped. But again, he's completely reckless in a good sense, like fearless and reckless, uses the language whenever he can, like interaction. Something I don't like doing, so everybody is different. I like more like, deep conversations after 2 years, or like one-on-one conversations about, I don't know, whatever. He really probably likes this stuff as well, but he really likes using the language from the get-go. So my piece of advice is you have to, once again, to experiment and do what works for you. Do you have a lot of language learning experience? Then maybe you have a confidence of using the language from the get-go, even if you don't speak it well. I'm more like of a perfectionist in this sense. I think this comes from my father. So until I reach a given level and I feel I prefer, for example, interacting with tutors instead of just launching myself into the environment and try to use the language, to inflict the language upon the first person who comes to crosses my path. But everybody is different. If you're more like Richard and you really want to use the language from the get-go, you learn, and on the go, let's say Mark, this guy, he's an extrovert. He's been learning French. He uses French. He uses Asimo to learn French. After 3 weeks, he wants to, after his first sentences, grabs a tutor on italki or whatever platform and starts, saying some words. That's totally fine. My suggestion would be to spend at least 3 to 6 months getting the language in you, listening and reading at the same time, just reading, just listening, watching, so that your brain gets an idea of the language, gets a foundation. But the speaking part, you have to decide when you want to do it, with whom you want to do it. It depends on the environment. Are you living in country? Are you living already, say, in Germany? Do you want to use the language? Do you have a lot of language experience? Are you confident? There's a lot of factors that are both personal and linguistic. Normally, again, my experience has been with the languages I've been learning and hundreds of students I've been coaching is that waiting a little bit, 6 months to 9 months is great because it allows the brain to spend time absorbing the language. You have to remember that we have limited time as adults, right? More often than not, we compare ourselves with children who have all the time in the world, literally 24/7, to listen to the language around them, to use it. But we don't have that luxury. Maybe an hour a day, maybe 30 minutes. The problem is we have to know how to use those minutes literally effectively, that time, the time slot. And what normally happens is that if you start speaking the language and you want to speak the language as much as possible, then let's go back to Mark, right? What happens is that the Mark that wants to focus just on input has 1 hour a day on input. The Mark who wants to speak will have maybe 30 minutes of input, 30 minutes of output. So the time that he dedicates to speaking, the time slot that he has for input gets eroded because he's putting in time for speaking, which is fine but it's less times to absorb the language. As Stephen Krashen famously said, Stephen Krashen is a very famous linguist that talks about comprehensible input. He said, you don't learn a language through speaking, you learn it through input. And that might sound very counterintuitive because he said, what? Wait a second. Don't you get to speak a language fluently by speaking it? Yes, but that's the icing on the cake. First is input. That's the cake. The icing is speaking, and speaking allows you to then reordering things. You will see a lot of gaps, etc. So to go back to your question, speaking is something you have to decide when to do, with whom to do it, etc., etc. I would say there is no fixed rule. You have to experiment. In my case, I can vouch for myself and for hundreds of students I've been coaching and that are at the Smart Language Learning Academy. It's about input first, and then when you feel like it, get, for example, a tutor and start having conversations that are really interesting for you. Because if you're interested in that, you will find a way to communicate. That's the most important thing. Focus on communication rather than performance. Again, school mindset. Oh, I have to perform, right? Get into the first conversation. You want to impress the person. You want to express. You don't want to impress. You want to express. And when you express, you will make mistakes. You will hesitate. You will have gaps. You will have fillers. I don't know. But you will learn as a consequence of that because your focus will be on communication and the learning will be a consequence of that and not the other way around.
It's really interesting because I feel like our personalities are really different in this way because I'm more like what you mentioned with Richard, and I would get the extrovert, I guess, wins of, I've just learned a word, one sentence in this language, let me try it out. And the thing is, it is kind of like running before learning to walk. And you will, in the short term, get a few smiles, and especially if it's an obscure language, but definitely that progress is going to be limited without all the background work that you've just mentioned there. So I think that even for the extroverts out there, in my opinion, yes, it is fun. It's really fun to try out those and kind of impress, but that's all it will be, a very short-lived moment. Whereas if you can combine that with all this groundwork now, every single time when you do interact with someone at a restaurant or whatever, it's going to be much more concrete and tangible than just, my example I was in an Italian restaurant in London, and the guy, I picked up quite a lot of Italian from working with Italians over the years. And this was years ago. He gave me the food and I wanted to, I'm thinking from an English perspective, I'd say, wow, that looks amazing. That looks beautiful. And I said, bellissimo. And he corrected me straight away and he said, no. He was asking like, how's the food, right? And then he said, no, è buonissimo. And because of his correction to me there, I've never forgot that from that moment. But I can only just say words, right? I'm not able to construct those proper sentences because I haven't done the groundwork that you've just mentioned there. So I think it's excellent. So yeah, very, very interesting though to think about the speaking side of things, because it's so when in the progression now, like Mark has actually been putting in that work for 3 to 6 months. He's building it up. Is there a point where it's like you can't progress anymore unless you speak then? So when is that moment of, okay, I'm not just impressing the waiter at the restaurant. Like I'm not going, like what's the point? I've spent a year and a half in my room now. You said it might be a tutor or it might be some language exchange. Have we reached that point, or is there anything we've missed yet before we're actually going out into the real world?
So there's a couple of important things to stress. Is the fact that first there's this law which is called the law of let me see if I remember correctly. The return of the law of the diminishing returns. Here's how it works, and this is why it's so important. When we want to continue, making progress, what normally happens is that we kind of hit a wall or we get stuck. This is a very typical thing that, I got stuck. I started speaking, say, German, let's say, or let's go back to Mark. Mark has been, he has done Asimil for 3 months. Then he's moved on. He's created his own podcast, a NotebookLM. And then he's been doing podcasts for a year, and then he decides to speak. Then he hires a tutor, starts speaking about stuff he likes. At the beginning, he struggles, but then he gets into the groove, right? So every time he's had 30 conversations with his tutor Laure from Paris, and he feels confident that he can have conversations. By any stretch of the imagination and by any standards, he's at a B2 conversational level. And then he feels like he's getting stuck, and he goes like, okay, what's going on? Like he knows that like greetings are automatic. He can converse automatically. He knows about a lot of stuff and resource to expressions within certain topics, and he feels great. But then he gets the impression that something is missing, and he can't express himself very elegantly. He wants to use slang, etc., etc. He goes like, okay, I've been speaking a lot 30 times, and now I want to speak more. What happens? What normally happens is that because of this law of diminishing returns, and this happens both mentally and physiologically, psychologically, and physically, what normally happens is that when you stretch your boundaries, whether it's like you're running, for example, let's say, or you're learning a language, your brain finds it difficult to make progress. You have to put in more and more effort to make progress. This is what normally happens when you're at B2 level and you want to move to C1, but this happens across the entire stage. What happens is that you have to stretch, to find ways to make it difficult for you, so you're stretching your boundaries. An example of that, which people can understand, you go to the gym, you're weighing, 30-pound lifts, 30-pound weights. That's okay. Then your body gets used to it. You have to start 35 or 40 so that then it's sore. You get sore muscles, but your muscles are getting bigger. That's exactly the same way it works with language learning. And to my opinion, you have to do two very important things. One is something very unpopular that nowadays not a lot of people do, and that is reading. You have to start reading. Once you've gotten hundreds of podcasts and hundreds of videos, which is reading, by the way, because you do the transcript and the subtitles, you can move on to graded readers, nonfiction books. That is really what really makes a difference when you want to start speaking well. You might say, what does speaking have to do with reading? Well, once again, it's all connected. These are separate skills that are all interconnected in your brain, because your brain is extremely complex. In my view, once you reach, once again, the upper echelons of language learning, C1, C2, you can handle the language at a professional level or an academic level. And when you can express yourself not only fluently, but also elegantly, you have to read hundreds of books. Something not a lot of people want to do, not very popular option. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you have to learn to use a language when it comes to speaking in ways you do not normally use the language, in ways you don't normally leverage your knowledge, so to speak. Let me give an example. Mark wants to start speaking well, right? Really elegantly in French. So my suggestion would be start, for example, with building monologues. You have 3 minutes to express your ideas, like let's say introduction, 3 ideas, just to give you an example of one of the things you can do. Introduction, 3 ideas, and conclusion in 3 minutes. That forces him, time limit forces him to speak in a concise way, and then you have a structure. So you can do a lot of exercises that are outside of your comfort zone. And if you think about it, this is what we do at school. We give speeches, we write dissertations, we get corrections, we leverage feedback. But who wants to do that once you reach a B2 level in your functional language? Not a lot of people want to do the heavy lifting. And the heavy lifting, you have to do it if you want to reach that very high academic, elegant level, because if you don't do it, what's going to happen is that you're always going to stay at the same level, which is great. B2 is a level where you can function, you're fluent in any, by any stretch of the imagination. But most people don't want to do that. To give you a very concrete example, I'm here in Krakow. I have a B2 level in Polish. And it means I speak the language fluently. I can speak with everybody. 2 days ago, I was in Katowice. I did some interviews with Easy Polish. I feel very confident speaking Polish. And yet, when I read a book, I still find it very difficult. Words I don't know. That is, okay, I understand now where I have to go. In order to move on, I have to read. So reading is one thing. Speaking in a different way is another thing. Get monologues, and you can do hundreds of different exercises. Describing images, you can talk to ChatGPT so that it gives you feedback. You always have to get feedback if you want to improve. You write dissertations, short dissertations, and you get either AI or better, a human being would be better, that corrects you. Working with a tutor would be amazing. A professional tutor who you sit down face to face possibly, and you go through all these complex skills of describing images, talking monologues about something, structuring speeches. You get feedback. You reuse that feedback to give the speech again, to describe the image again. So that is heavy lifting, but that is what most people do not want to do. So reading hundreds of books and doing specific, it's called deliberate practice. And there's an amazing book which is called Peak the Science of Expertise. Amazing book for if you're interested in skill development by Erickson and Poole, that talk about how Judith Polgar, Judith and her sisters, they became, for example, chess masters because the dad, since they were 3, 4, did deliberate practice in chess. And he talks about all the best athletes and the best professionals in the world that have been doing this so-called deliberate practice. You want to become a professional, top world professional in language learning, you'll have to do the heavy lifting.
I think that's it. People often on the internet, on YouTube as well, they're going to be attracted to a title that says the quick way, the easy way of doing this.
Free, fast, and easy. They want to
and it's the same with the gym as well, right? Get into amazing shape in just 3 months, whatever. And maybe some people have achieved those things, but I feel like in my experiences with languages, it took a very long time. I mean, my first university degree, to relate it to what you were saying, was French and politics. So double major. And in those French classes, in the final year, they would grill us. We would go and sit, because we had the foundations at that point, but we would be forced to debate each other in French on more advanced topics and then receive feedback on it. And, these weren't the day-to-day conversations you would have, but it would just force your level up. And it was uncomfortable, but then after a while you get used to doing it. And I think it just becomes part of the routine. But again, you're touching a nerve with me there, because I haven't really read any French books since my university days. And I know that part of me why haven't I done that is because I know it's going to push me to the limits and be difficult. And I'm still thinking, I watch YouTube videos in French and I can understand, but I know that the books are that level up, and I feel like, that's hitting me. I feel like I need to go back to the books, literally. So it's a really excellent point there.
You don't have to if you don't want to, but the reason why books are so paramount when it comes to enriching your vocabulary and also for your language acquisition is simply because of something that is called Zipf's law. Basically, the frequency of words goes down very fast. So the first word is, let's say, has a certain frequency. The second word is half frequent. The third is half frequent, and the third. And the problem is, in order to acquire words, you need to see them at least 8 or 10 times. And of course, the rarer the word, the more unlikely it is that you're going to stumble upon it. And books contain all this stuff. The book I'm reading, which is called Apocalypse Z, an amazing book. It's a Polish translation of this book that was written by Mauro Loureiro. I don't remember the exact name. Contains all the words I've never seen, and on top of that, descriptions of actions of zombies. It's a zombie apocalypse movie of things like parts of cars, it's amazing the vocabulary that I've never even seen, and the description. Because in a movie they don't describe images; you see it directly. In a movie, in a book, the author describes in detail all the actions and reactions and things unfolding, and the actions, things you don't get to talk to a guy that over a pint describing in detail things like in a book. But you get that when you read a book. Either it's novel, nonfiction is not as difficult. It's actually easier. My simple piece of advice for those who want to get into reading is read stuff that you have already read in your own native language, because you're familiar with the content, you like it. Just reread it in your target language to get a foot into the wonderful world of extensive reading, and then progressively you can read more and more books, and then it gets easier from there.
And I think this really relates to, this is the reason why this video and this discussion is called From Beginner to Really Native Level, because there's a huge space, and I'm probably, admittedly, in some ways part of that space where you can speak to a so-called polyglot who will say he's fluent, and they'll put in what do they call it? The little, what do they call that? The subscript.
I don't know what you mean. I don't know.
Like when you read a contract, the bottom bit.
In Italian they call it postilla. I don't know in English. I gotta tell you.
So in the postilla, they're gonna say conversationally fluent.
Oh, right.
In the small print, I think is the word they use in English. And then conversationally fluent, right? And I would say in certain languages, I've got that ability because of the frequency. How often someone's asked me, "Where are you from?" I'm British. Like in Thailand, I lived there. I'm not fluent by any means, but it's muscle memory to tell people, "เป็นคนอังกฤษนะครับคุณมาจากที่ไหน?" Like, where are you from? I'm from there. อยู่กรุงเทพ4 ปี Like, I lived in Thailand for 4 years, and it's boom, boom, boom. I can say it so many times. but then there's that one follow-up question that they ask that I haven't learned yet, and the house of cards kind of falls apart. And I'm all for people just learning parts of languages to help to connect people, but this is the real difference between a native level speaker and, I'm sure you've got a couple extra cherries on the cake to put here, but I guess the accent and pronunciation, right? We've spoken about, okay, now Mark's reading. He's coming across these terms that even a lot of French speakers may not use on a day-to-day basis. He's going really into, he's reading astrophysics now, literature and publications, and he's actually starting to understand a lot of it because of that frequency of reading it. But when he speaks, je m'appelle Mark, je suis American, je n'ai pas accent français maintenant, so how can Mark lose that American accent while he's speaking in French? Because he's now at the level where he's holding his own in those conversations in that academic world.
Oh, this is a very interesting question. We're opening a can of worms here. So I'm gonna try to to simplify to the bone. But my suggestion would be this. Okay, let's go back to one lesson I've learned by learning Swedish. I always thought I was good with accents, meaning I picked up accents and pronunciation quickly. So I thought I took it for granted that yet another language. I'm learning Swedish, right? That's another language I'm gonna define, etc. But actually, I kind of neglected how different Swedish was from any other language I had learned so far, because it has in Swedish you have, I don't know if you probably listen to Swedish. It's a very sing-songy the melody of the language is like jag pratar svenska för att jag älskar. So it is like it's a semi or semi-tonal language, meaning that you can pronounce certain words that look identical from on then, and you say on then. So they're written the same, but they sound different because the tone, you have different two different tone systems. You got tone 1 and tone 2. But the bottom line is that I disregarded all that and I developed bad pronunciation. Now, why am I telling you that? Is because human beings are good at learning things. They're not very good at unlearning things. In other words, when the Gordian knot is very tight, it's really difficult to untie that knot. So someone who's developed very bad pronunciation habits, good luck with fixing those. I've had students that came to me after 20 years of speaking, say, English. In particular, I remember one was Indian. He had a very thick Indian accent, which is totally fine. But he asked me, hey, I've been living in the States for 20 years. I want to speak like an American. I told him, I don't want to sound discouraging, but if you've been speaking the language for 20 years, and we were talking about before that the patterns become automatic. So your brain gets used to speaking producing language in a certain way. Undoing that is not worth it. It's going to be excruciatingly difficult. And my suggestion is, if you can focus on pronunciation, be interested in pronunciation from the get-go, because down the line it's going to be way exceedingly easier. That's the reason why I always recommend listen as much as you can. Be interested in the language, pay attention to patterns, in particular intonation and pronunciation from the get-go. Now, you might retort and say, yeah, but most people have an accent when they speak a foreign language. That is totally normal because you carry over the phonetic rules of your own native language into another one. And so having an accent, a foreign accent, is more the rule rather than the exception. Having said that, though, a guy like Steve Krashen, I always refer to him because he's a great guy. You can easily download this. It's called a hypothesis on accent acquisition or on accent in language acquisition by Stephen Krashen. There's a PDF you can download. It's totally free. He claims that all adults, and I repeat, all adults or adults are good at imitating accents. They just decide not to. This to me is very, very true. So the very first thing is not, accent reduction, all these cool things you find on the internet when you're shadowing, you're trying to do this and you're trying to do that. You go into the nitty-gritty details of how le re en français in French is pronounced, or le rein, or etc. It's more the will of blending in and wanting to sound like an American, like a French, like a German, etc., etc. In my case, when I started learning English, in particular American English, because I got an American accent, what happened is that my desire of sounding like a native, of blending in, of what, like, I remember I was watching all these videos and I was trying to imitate the actors. I was trying to imitate the way they spoke. That went beyond the linguistic nitty-gritty details of pronunciation and intonation. It really wanted to be an American. And Stephen Krashen talks about that. Adults have it. It's difficult for them to embrace, to leave their own tribe, because we identify by, of course, the flag, the nation, religion, but also by language, and embrace another flag, religion, language, etc., etc. So what happened at school, I'll give you a very concrete example, is that when you sound different from what, all the others sound like, then you get a little bit ostracized in a way, or you get not laughed at. So after starting working with Susan, my American teacher, private tutor, I started to sound more like this instead of sounding like this, like all the other people who were speaking at the school. And so people started making fun of me. Oh, he sounds nasal. He sounds so nasal. And I got this, kind of pressure of sounding Italian and not sounding American, because that was bothering people. So normally what I say is that the people I've talked to who speak a lot of languages or some languages almost like a native speaker, never like a native, but close, are people who first and foremost want to be what they psychologically lack this barrier that keeps any attempt to sound like a native there and keep it tracked. So when people ask me how I teach these things, I teach phonology and phonetics. So how do you dissect sound structures? How do you identify, they're called phonetic blocks, intonation, all that is useless if you don't unlock this thing that works and functions under the radar. It's a subconscious thing, so it's not easy to fix. That's the big problem with pronunciation. We can all sound extremely good, almost like native speakers. We choose not to. Here's another very interesting thing that Pimsleur, the guy who's reading the book, also advocates for and vouches for. Try, when you're learning a foreign language, to imitate people in your own native language. So, for example, let's say you're learning French. Try to imitate a person speaking French in English, and try to pay attention how French people actually, this is thumb down.
Yeah, the French, they're not happy about that.
French doing like a thumb down, how French people speak your own native language. And you will see that you imitate it quite well in your own native language, because that comes to you much easier rather than, speaking French, which is a foreign language, in French. You will see that it's mainly a psychological thing. Then, of course, it's muscle memory. You have to train your muscles, etc. But going back to your question, to that guy who's been speaking, he speaks the language at an academic level with a very thick accent. There's not much to do when it comes to accent, but for Mark, who just started learning a language, or even for someone who's been learning a language for 3-6 months, there's still time. Listen, pay attention to sounds, but you also have to want to sound like a native speaker to, not to abandon your own tribe, but to embrace another one. This is a very important thing. But my suggestion is to read that piece of paper, the academic paper by Stephen Krashen. It's very simple, goes straight to the point, very counterintuitive, very surprising, goes against all the things we're taught. It's impossible to sound like a native. After the so-called critical threshold, when you're 13 or 14, it's impossible. It's not true. Just think outside of the box and expand your limits, as they say, expand your horizons.
No, great. I mean, it's quite relatable, because even growing up in the UK, in secondary school, I was one of the only students who decided to do French and Spanish for GCSE. And, most people would think, they felt annoyed that they had to do one. But I remember really, just my personality, I was very enthusiastic. And a lot of the other British kids would say, oh, come on, mate, why do you want to speak another language for? Everyone speaks English. So there was that phase of, I'm trying my hardest in the class to sound like a native. I'm saying, bonjour, je suis Hakim, je m'appelle Hakim. And the other students are looking at me like, why are you trying so hard?
Yeah.
And, I would be asking the teacher questions in French, but they would, il voulait parler comme un anglais en français. They'd want to keep that. That's their identity. And understanding that from that perspective and that explanation makes sense, because, not to go too much into my personal story, but I'm mixed. So I always kind of felt a little bit, was never really like all the Brits and was never really like all the Asians. So I just felt, I've got no choice. Let me just try and imitate everyone. So that subconscious point there of just letting go is so important, because I feel like most people I would have never even thought to associate it that deeply to even nationalism or, when you go really deep into the roots of why. I mean, nowadays, you don't want to be seen as offensive for imitating someone else, but they do say imitation is one of the biggest forms of flattery. So let's just look on the bright side of life for this.
Exactly.
But no, excellent.
Exactly.
Really, really enjoy those points. So, okay, I think we've covered quite a lot, but let's say, I want to ask, we've looked at the accents, the grammar, the vocab, reading. Anything we've missed so far in this conversation?
Well, I could talk about language learning for hours. Of course, it's a huge field. I think one other thing I might add is learning and maintaining multiple languages for those who have been learning 2 languages or 3 languages or 4 languages. There's 2 things I wanted to say. My piece of advice, I'm building as of now a course about that because the students of my academy have been asking that, and also people on YouTube, how do you learn and maintain multiple languages? So to complete the conversation, I would say normally my piece of advice when it comes to actively learning multiple languages at the same time, my piece of advice would be learn a maximum of 2. Life is hard. Language learning is not easy, and we are very busy. So 2 languages is fine. 3, 4 is already stretching yourself thin because we have only so much time. And the other piece of advice in that regard is to try to learn languages that are actually different from one another. If you try to learn Italian and Spanish at the same time, good luck with that. They're going to get mixed up. You're going to mix them up, and it's not going to be easy. Well, if you know one well, let's say at least a B2 level, then it gets much easier to learn. You can leverage that in order to learn Italian. Let's say you speak Spanish fluently, that really helps you learn Italian if you speak it at a fluent level. If you don't, that's a problem. And the second thing, maintaining languages. People ask me, how do you maintain so many languages? Because I have to juggle 14 languages. I always say the language is like, think about it as a family, right? Family members. There's a family member and a newborn who needs all your attention, right? Then you have the teenager language, the teenager who's just about to leave home, but is still not completely independent. That is intermediate. And then you have the adult that maybe they're 25, they're going to college, they left the household. And you remember, the more newborn kids you have, like the new languages, the more difficult it's going to get. My simple advice is to make sure that the language learning becomes second nature. So just to give an example, I associate certain spaces, activities, and times with certain languages. I think you said it at the beginning.
Yeah, I've seen the video. Awesome video.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just like, for example, I kitchen, lunch, preparing food, eating the food, cleaning up the dishes is all dedicated to listening to the news in French or in Russian. So it's automatic for me. I don't have to think about it anymore. I just listen. I listen to those because listening is the one thing once you reach a certain level. And I'm talking about maintaining a language when at least I have a B2 level, to give you a framework of reference. Because at that point, the language doesn't shrink back to oblivion. Well, this, unfortunately, you run the risk of that happening if you just have a smattering of that language. So I built a life around that. So in the bathroom, I read in German. Sorry, German. That's bathroom associated with German. I read, for example, in Polish at night in bed. I listen to stuff in French. If I take a walk, if I take a shower with the AirPods, for example, I don't wash my hair, I'm listening to stuff in Polish or in Hungarian in the morning. After workout, I also do Greek. So I can't do all the languages every day. Let's say that because of work, because of my life circumstances, friends and girlfriends in the past, I have been able to use between 4 and 10 languages every day. But again, it would be impossible for me if I did not work with languages. If I hadn't made the fateful decision of making language learning part of my, languages and language learning part of my job, my life, etc. I travel a lot. And I think the micro environment, what I do at home, and the macro environment, what I do outside with friends, traveling, etc., is a nice mix in order to keep some of the languages afloat, keep some of the languages fluently, but something's got to give, as they say. I'm just a human being. My time is limited. For example, there are languages in which I'm rusty. As I said before, I've been learning 15 languages, but I speak 10 of them fluently. Languages like Chinese, Japanese, Danish. What else? There's at least 5 that they say Japanese, yes, that if you ask me at the spur of the moment, on a whim to speak, I would have a really hard time speaking because I haven't, like, for example, Chinese, I used to speak it decently, but I haven't spoken it in years. I remember I was shocked when a Chinese lady came, because like back in the day, I was doing Airbnb. I did not even remember the word 工作, which means to work, and then I tried to say something along the lines of, let's see if I remember, I try to say 工程师. 工程师 is like an engineer. Like 工作, I would try to say I work as an engineer, or I wanted to work as an engineer, because I've never really worked as an engineer, by the way. I was become this career path as a linguist, but words didn't come. And I say, how can I not remember 工作? Because I hadn't spoken the language in years. So you have to be realistic when it comes to language learning. You can't speak, like, it's an extremely time-consuming thing for the brain, for your life, etc. And it really depends on my life circumstances. I don't try to keep all these languages at a very high native level to boast on YouTube, but I can care less about that. That's for my own life. As of now, Polish is much more important than Chinese. Why would I spend all my time learning Chinese if China is a distant reality for me as of now, while Poland is my reality now because I spent a lot of time in Poland. So it really depends on life cycles, circumstances, priorities, and you have to make decisions. And my decision is mainly to focus on European languages, just because I gravitate. Can you say gravitate? I spend a lot of time in Europe more than anything. So that's to give you a realistic perspective of what it means to speak a bunch of languages. You also have to maintain it. Learning it becomes easier in a way. Maintaining becomes more and more difficult for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it links back to a point I watched in one of your breakdowns of, like, I think it was in the 3 key principles. It was like the core. I think that was the second point in one of the videos. You need the core. So we've spoken about how to get that core, and you can kind of always fall back on it, but you need to put that extra groundwork in to maintain it. Otherwise, you're just going to be going like the diminishing returns, right? Back and forth, back and forth.
Exactly.
But you're making me be really self-reflective about why, how difficult it is to integrate all of them into your life, because I feel like I was quite fortunate because I was at university in London, which is so diverse. I then worked while I was a student for like 5 years as an activity leader at a language school. So I wasn't thinking, oh, great, I've got time to speak Spanish and Korean to these people. I was just doing it. And then while working in a diverse environment at the UN, you're speaking to people all the time. Whereas if you're doing a back-end computer science job remotely, it's going to be way harder to dedicate that time to doing all of those things. And I've seen in your videos as well, you say it's kind of like the lifestyle where you choose, this isn't an obligation, but you make the choice to spend time with people in an international environment. I mean, I love Italians, but if you were only speaking with Italians all the time, it would be, I guess, nearly impossible to maintain it on that level that you have now. But yeah, Luca, I feel like we've covered so much. Super, super grateful for this extremely comprehensive breakdown of going from beginner to native level. Do you have any extra message or to anyone watching this, where they can find you and how they can connect with you and your work?
Sure. They can, if they type Luca Lampariello on YouTube and on Google, they will find my lucalampariello.com. That's my website where I have my my blog and my services, and they can also find the courses that I have. These are courses about learning how to learn. So it's meta learning, so to speak. So learning how to learn from as a beginner, learning how to learn as an intermediate learner. We're also preparing this how to learn and maintain multiple languages. And then the next one is going to be how to move from B2 to C2. So native-like skills. And we also offer, coaching services, and there's a lot of stuff that you can find there. And my YouTube channel, on my YouTube channel, I just share hundreds of videos where I talk about this stuff. So if you type grammar, Luca Lampariello grammar, Luca Lampariello vocabulary, Luca Lampariello speaking, you will find the stuff we've talked about, and I address one topic at a time. And the last message is that, as Kato Lomb or Lomb Kato used to say, she's a very famous Hungarian polyglot. Language is one of the few things that are really worth learning, even a little bit, even if poorly. Because when we think about robots, when we think about AI, when we think about, is it even worth learning foreign languages in a world where we can communicate through technology? I always say yes, it is, because language learning is going to be beneficial, not only because it allows you to speak with other people, but as a citizen of the world. And also, your brain is more and more powerful. You understand reality through a different lens. I have the privilege and the luxury of seeing this firsthand. I see things differently from like just a simple perspective of someone being, for example, in Poland. I see what it means to like the culture, how people think, how they interact also with foreigners. It's a beautiful feeling. And I think filtering it through technology is okay. It's great that you communicate with other people, but ultimately language learning is one of the most rewarding things you might ever do in your life. So it's always worth it. Nowadays, it's possible to do it. If you learn how to do it, invest time in figuring out how to do it and what works for you, specifically for you, by leveraging the most important universal principles, and then the world is all yours.
Thanks so much. And yeah, personally, I mean, we found you through your YouTube channel. And what I think's awesome about it is that you've been in the game a long time. So we can actually see your development from, I think, was it like 16 years ago of you speaking all these different languages? And I would, every time, like, as I went through, looking through your content, I would see the number of languages just slowly increasing of like, I speak 8 languages, I speak this and this and this. So, yeah, it just shows back to the point of today's conversation about that patience and perseverance. I think you're a perfect example of that. We're all super grateful for you today. Make sure, of course, all of Luca's links and things mentioned there are going to be in the description box below. But yes, thank you, of course, to Luca. Thanks to the viewers. Please do subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Hit the like button as it helps us to make more content like this. Share it with anyone else you think would benefit. But until next time, grazie mille e a bientôt.
Grazie a te, Hakim.